You know something is wrong the moment a royal comeback turns into a global competition. And that's exactly what happened the night Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped back onto the red carpet at the Royal Variety Performance 2025 after months of battling cancer. A night that should have been defined by hope, courage, and healing was suddenly overshadowed by one explosive whisper. One sentence, one accusation, one line allegedly spoken by Meghan Markle herself. A line so sharp, so startling, that when it leaked, even the most seasoned royal watchers were left stunned. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She only came back to steal the spotlight from me. Why would Meghan say something like that? Why now? Why in the very moment when Catherine's return symbolized a victory against fear, illness, and uncertainty? Why when the world was applauding her strength, her presence, her resilience? Why question her intentions at all? These are the kinds of contradictions that pull audiences into a story, the kind that make you lean forward, wondering if you misread the entire situation. Maybe you did. Or maybe something deeper was happening behind the scenes. Something no one was prepared to talk about openly. Something only whispered in private rooms, in late-night calls, and in Hollywood circles where reputations and narratives shift quicker than a tabloid headline. Because here's the truth. This night wasn't just another royal event. It was the culmination of months of speculation, silence, tension, and carefully managed public images. Catherine's return wasn't simply a red carpet moment. It was a statement, a reclaiming, an emotional exhale after a brutally difficult year. And for many, it was one of the most anticipated royal appearances of the decade. But for Meghan, it seems it meant something very different. Something competitive, something personal, something she may not have intended to become public, but did. And that's when the story explodes. Before we dive in, ask yourself, when two women marry into the same institution, do comparisons ever truly stop? Can they? Especially when both have lived under the harsh glare of global attention. Especially when one builds a brand around independence, and the other becomes the embodiment of poise and duty. Especially when every gesture, every outfit, every expression becomes fuel for a narrative. It makes you wonder, because the line wasn't just surprising, it carried weight. It hinted at a rivalry that didn't fade with distance, silence, or time. A rivalry that resurfaced the moment Catherine stepped into the spotlight again. But here's the twist. This wasn't the night anyone expected conflict. Not from Hollywood. Not from Montecito. Not from Meghan. And certainly not between two women whose lives took such different paths after 2020. Yet, the tension didn't just appear out of thin air. It simmered for years, through interviews, documentaries, statements, leaks, subtle digs, and parallel public trajectories that always seemed to collide at the exact moments when one woman rose higher than expected. So why did it matter so much in 2025? Because Catherine's return was more than symbolic. It reset the royal narrative. It recentered public sympathy. It reminded the world why she was beloved long before the drama, long before the interviews, long before the Sussex exit. And while Meghan's brand had thrived on reinvention, Catherine's quiet resilience somehow, without trying, overshadowed it in a single evening. Everyone felt the shift the moment Catherine stepped out of the car. The camera flashes intensified. The applause swelled. Social media lit up instantly. Millions watched her move slowly but determinedly across the carpet, the air around her electric, fragile, and triumphant all at once. There was emotion in her eyes, real, unfiltered, unpolished emotion, and viewers connected with that instantly. It was a universal human story, but not everyone was celebrating. Just minutes before Catherine stepped out, someone overheard Meghan's alleged comment. The one that would later spark debate, ignite online wars, and send royal insiders into silent panic. She only came back to steal the spotlight from me. 8 words that sliced through the Hollywood Montecito bubble and made their way across oceans to the UK before the night even ended. Was it jealousy? Frustration? Anxiety? Strategy? Or was it misinterpreted, exaggerated, or perhaps even taken out of context? These questions would ripple across the digital landscape within hours. But here's where things get even more intense. The source who leaked the comment didn't stop at that. They claimed that wasn't the only thing Meghan said, that there was a second line, a harsher one they hesitated to repeat. One you'll hear later in this story, but not yet. Because the timing of that second line doesn't make sense until you understand how the night unfolded and what was happening behind the scenes on both sides of the Atlantic. Let's step back for a moment. Why does this story matter in 2025? Why now? Why does this moment feel like a new chapter in a rivalry everyone thought had cooled? Because Catherine's comeback wasn't supposed to be glamorous. It was supposed to be quiet, gentle, respectful, a return defined by gratitude and caution. But the public and media transformed it into something larger than life. Her supporters rallied online. Royal coverage surged. Hashtag Welcome Back Catherine trended worldwide for over 12 hours. Headlines called it the moment the monarchy breathed again. Even critics admitted the emotional power of her appearance. And when a wave that big hits the public consciousness, it can wash away competing narratives instantly, including Meghan's. Here's where the emotional stakes rise. Catherine wasn't seeking a spotlight. She wasn't seeking dominance. She wasn't seeking headlines. She was simply stepping forward after a battle that fundamentally reshaped her sense of self. But the reaction she received, overwhelming, explosive, global, created a shockwave that traveled far beyond the royal red carpet. And in Montecito, that shockwave hit a fragile moment. Meghan was entering a critical PR phase for her 2025 projects, new partnerships, a rebranded philanthropic push, and a media rollout carefully planned across major outlets. The kind of rollout that needed attention, needed momentum, needed narrative space. But Catherine's return swallowed all of it in one night. That's why the alleged comment feels so revealing. It wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. It wasn't just personal. It was professional. It wasn't just rivalry. It was timing. But here's what makes this story so gripping. The contradiction at its core. Catherine returned to the spotlight unwillingly, humbly, cautiously. Meghan wanted to stay in the spotlight intentionally, assertively, confidently. And the moment those two energies collided, the narrative flipped. And the public noticed. So what really happened? Who heard Meghan's comment? Why did it leak? What made it so damaging? Why was Catherine's comeback such a pivotal moment? And what's the real dynamic between these two women in 2025? A dynamic the public only sees fragments of. We're about to unpack all of it. But before we move into Chapter 1, let me set the final stage for this introduction. The night of the royal variety performance wasn't merely a royal event. It was the climax of the year's emotional arc. A night loaded with symbolism, fear, hope, global attention, and a silent expectation that Catherine might not appear at all. When she did, it was like watching a long storyline resolve itself in real time. But little did anyone know, that was just the surface story. Because behind the scenes, an entirely different narrative was unfolding. A narrative involving overheard conversations, conflicting PR agendas, rising tensions, and an unseen line that Meghan allegedly said, a line that hasn't yet gone public, but will. And that is where this story truly begins. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the most shocking royal rivalry of 2025 didn't begin on a stage, not on a red carpet, not in front of cameras, but in a private conversation someone wasn't supposed to overhear? What if everything that followed, the headlines, the online wars, the global debate, all traced back to one moment, one sentence, one spark that ignited a fire no one could put out? Because that's exactly what happened. And the strangest part? It didn't happen in London. It didn't happen backstage at the royal variety performance. It didn't even happen anywhere near Catherine. It happened in California. Hours, not minutes, hours. Before the world saw Catherine take her first steps onto that red carpet. And that's where our story truly begins. But first, let me ask you something directly, because this is important. Do you think jealousy disappears with distance? Do you think resentment fades simply because someone moves across the ocean? Do you think a rivalry becomes irrelevant just because one person steps out of the royal system? You already know the answer. Some tensions don't fade. They ferment. And the alleged comment, the line that would travel across continents and erupt into one of the biggest royal conversations of the decade, didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew from years of comparisons, frustrations, silence, and pressure that neither woman publicly acknowledged, but both felt constantly. It grew from interviews, headlines, rumors, and a world that never stopped pitting them against each other. So when Catherine stepped onto that carpet, something inside Meghan was triggered. But to understand why, we have to rewind to earlier that day. Picture Montecito. Warm morning light. Birds. Espresso machines humming. The calm, curated tranquility of a luxury lifestyle, interrupted by tension thick enough to slice through. Meghan had a full day of calls scheduled, producers, partners, PR strategists, and a late afternoon meeting about an upcoming digital project she'd been quietly working on for months. A project that was meant to be the beginning of her 2025 rebrand. Something sleek, something polished, something powerful, a fresh start. Except the universe had other plans. Because early that morning, Catherine's team confirmed her appearance at the Royal Variety Performance 2025, an announcement so unexpected, so emotionally charged, that it instantly dominated the news cycle. It didn't give PR professionals time to prepare. It didn't give tabloids time to coordinate angles. It dropped like thunder out of a clear sky. Within minutes, social media exploded. Within an hour, TV networks pivoted. Within 2 hours, TikTok stitched together emotional compilations and comeback montages. And while Meghan's team watched the trending list shift in real time, something in the atmosphere changed. You know that feeling, when you plan something big, something meaningful, something carefully timed, and life blindsides you. Now imagine that happening on a global scale. And imagine being compared, yet again, to the woman at the center of that moment. So by the time Meghan entered her meeting that afternoon, the tension was already there. Subtle at first, invisible to an outsider, but to someone who knew her well, it was obvious. A stiff posture, a clipped tone, a distracted expression, a moment where she glanced at her phone one too many times, watching the Catherine hashtags climb, climb. And then came the pivot, the moment someone in the room, trying to be helpful, trying to fill silence, trying to break the awkwardness, said the one sentence they absolutely should not have said. Well, Catherine really knows how to draw the spotlight, doesn't she? Harmless? Maybe. But in a room charged with pressure, it was like dropping a match onto dry grass. Meghan didn't laugh. She didn't shrug. She didn't make a neutral comment. She leaned back in her chair, exhaled sharply, and said the line that would eventually travel across the Atlantic. She only came back to steal the spotlight from me. Was she joking? Was she venting? Was it sarcasm? Was it frustration boiling over? Interpretations vary, but emotions? Those were unmistakable. Someone in that room would later describe the moment as a crack in the facade. The brief instant where the polished composure slipped, revealing a rawness underneath that Meghan usually keeps tightly controlled. But the story doesn't end there, because it wasn't just the line. It was the tone. You can tell a lot from tone, can't you? A compliment can sound like an insult. A question can sound like a threat. And frustration can sound like confession. And Meghan's tone, according to the source, wasn't playful. It was sharp, exasperated, laced with something that sounded a lot like fear dressed up as annoyance. Fear of losing relevance? Fear of losing attention? Fear of being overshadowed by a woman who didn't even speak that night? Or was it something deeper? A fear that the narrative she'd been building for years might be slipping out of her control? Ask yourself, have you ever felt like someone else's success somehow shrunk your own? Have you ever watched the world celebrate another person and wondered where that left you? Have you ever felt invisible at the exact moment you wanted to be seen? If you have, then you understand the emotional undercurrent here. But here's the twist, and it's one most people don't realize. Someone else was in the room. Someone Meghan didn't expect. Someone who wasn't part of the core team. A friend of a consultant. A guest. A quiet observer who wasn't supposed to hear anything confidential. But did. They heard the line. They remembered it. And later, much later, they repeated it. That's how the world found out. But at the moment Meghan said it, no one reacted. Not really. Not outwardly. The room froze for half a second. Then someone changed the subject. Someone else poured water. Someone nervously tapped a pen. But the mood shifted. And here's where the contradictions intensify. Because while Meghan's comment traveled across Montecito, something else, something far more emotional, was happening in London at the exact same time. And the contrast between the two moments? That's what makes this chapter so powerful. Because Catherine wasn't thinking about spotlight at all. Let's travel back across the ocean. Inside a hotel suite close to the venue, Catherine stood in front of a mirror. Hairstyled, dress fitted, jewelry minimal. her breathing slow, controlled, but heavy with meaning. The lights were bright. Her heartbeat was louder. And her hands, steady for months, were trembling for the first time that day. This wasn't nerves about fashion. This wasn't stage fright. This wasn't insecurity. This was vulnerability. Real vulnerability. She whispered something to herself. Something soft, almost inaudible. Something she believed only William could hear. I hope I'm ready. Ready for what? The cameras? The attention? The expectations? Or was she wondering whether her body, still healing, still adjusting, still recovering, could handle the pressure of this symbolic, historic return? While Meghan was speaking in frustration thousands of miles away, Catherine was speaking in uncertainty, humility, and hope. Two women, two continents, two emotional states, one shared moment, unfolding in polar opposite ways. If that isn't contradiction, what is? And maybe that's why Meghan's comment hit so hard once it leaked. Because context matters, timing matters, emotion matters. And when the world eventually heard the alleged line, they didn't hear it in isolation. They heard it against the backdrop of Catherine's return. Her fragility, her bravery, her tears, her husband's protective presence, her people's overwhelming support. When you place Meghan's line next to that image, the contrast sharpens into something almost painful. But let me ask you directly, do you think Meghan meant it as cruelly as it sounds? Or do you think she was venting in a moment when stress made her say the worst possible version of her thoughts? This is important because intention matters in a rivalry like this. But intention doesn't erase impact. And the impact of that one sentence was enormous. Because while Raphael, the man who overheard the comment, didn't say anything at first, he noticed something strange. Meghan didn't stop at that one line. She kept speaking, quietly, lower, but still audible. And that's when she allegedly said something else. Something sharper. Something that wouldn't make headlines yet. Something he would only reveal later, after Catherine's appearance went viral. After the world began choosing sides. After the online storms began raging. But we're not there yet. Because before that second line comes into play, before the real explosion, something else happened that afternoon that no one talks about. Something that made Meghan stand up abruptly, walk over to her phone, check something, and fall silent for a long, tense moment. What did she see? A new headline, a photo, a message, a private alert, a trending topic, a clip, a leak, or something more personal. Whatever it was, it froze her completely. And that moment, that sudden, chilling pause, is what changed the tone of the room entirely. Because what Meghan saw wasn't just Catherine in a dress. It was something far more dangerous to her brand. And that's where the story pivots next. Because what came next would change everything, and you're not prepared for the reason why. What if the bravest moment of Catherine's life wasn't stepping onto the royal variety red carpet, but the long, silent battle that happened far away from the cameras, the gowns, the applause, and the headlines? What if everything the world celebrated that night, the poise, the grace, the resilience, was built on days when she could barely stand, nights when she couldn't sleep, and mornings when she questioned whether she would ever feel like herself again? Because that's the part the public never sees. And that's where Chapter 2 begins. But before we dive in, let me ask you directly. Have you ever watched someone try to rebuild themselves after life hits them hard? Have you ever seen someone hold themselves together in public while struggling in private? Have you ever wondered what it takes, emotionally, physically, spiritually, to come back after something that changes everything? That's what Catherine lived through. Quietly, privately, without fanfare or spectacle. So let's rewind. Long before the dresses were chosen, long before the palace approved her appearance, long before the global wave of excitement began building, Catherine was in a different world entirely. A world made of hospital corridors, whispered conversations, specialist appointments, medication schedules, and the kind of exhaustion that turns even small tasks into mountains. While the public speculated, argued, and spun theories, she was fighting. Not dramatically, not loudly, not theatrically, quietly, the way she has always done everything. Catherine's recovery wasn't linear. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't predictable. Some days, she felt strong enough to walk in the garden with her children. Other days, she needed help just getting out of bed. Some mornings, she felt hopeful. By afternoon, she felt defeated. Some evenings, she smiled through family dinners. Others she closed her bedroom door and cried quietly into her pillow so the children wouldn't worry. And William? He carried all of it. Let's talk about him, because he was a crucial part of this journey, and not as a prince, not as a future king, not as a royal symbol. As a husband, as a father, as someone terrified of losing the most important person in his life. There were nights when he stayed awake just watching her breathe. There were mornings when he drove her to appointments with a silence so tense it felt like prayer. There were afternoons when he handled the children's routines alone so Catherine could rest without guilt. No cameras captured these moments. No headlines reported them. No palace statements described them. This was the private reality behind the public calm. But here's what might surprise you. During her recovery, Catherine wasn't motivated by the desire to return to duty. Not at first. Not even later. She was motivated by one thing: her children. She wanted to be strong for them, present for them, reassuring for them. Prince George became more protective. He would often peek into her room when he thought she was asleep, just to make sure she was okay. Princess Charlotte, always emotionally attuned, offered the gentlest comfort. Little drawings, small gifts, whispered encouragements. And Prince Louis. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough to give extra hugs and ask fewer questions. Those children were her anchor. But even with their love, recovery tested her in ways she never imagined. There were days when she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Not her face, not her energy, not her spirit. Treatment had changed her, slowed her, softened things that were once strong, weakened things she never thought would falter. And then there were the fears. The ones no one talks about. Fear of relapse. Fear of not being able to keep up with royal duties. Fear of disappointing the public. Fear of being seen as fragile. Fear of looking weak. She wrestled with all of it. But something shifted around late summer 2025. Her doctors noticed progress. Her energy began returning in small, gentle waves. Her appetite improved. Her laughter came back, not the polite, dutiful one, but the real one. And slowly, the idea of returning to public life went from impossible to maybe, and then maybe turned into possibly, and then possibly turned into privately discussing a timeline. Not because she needed the spotlight, not because she wanted attention, not because she felt pressured, because she wanted to reclaim a part of herself. When you go through something life-changing, a part of you disappears into survival mode. Catherine wanted to find the part she lost. But here's the twist you didn't expect. Catherine didn't choose the royal variety performance. It was suggested. By whom? Not the palace. Not the doctors. Not the PR team. By William. Not because he wanted to put her out there, but because he believed she needed a controlled moment of triumph. A moment that wasn't overly taxing, wasn't politically charged, and wasn't too long. A moment filled with music, performance, artistry, not pressure. A moment where she could be Catherine. Not the princess recovering from cancer. At first, she hesitated. She doubted herself. She questioned whether she was ready. She told William, "What if I look tired? What if I seem weak? What if people worry? What if they think I'm pushing myself?" William responded in the most unroyal, unscripted, deeply human way possible. "We'll go together. And if you feel overwhelmed, we'll leave together too." That was the turning point. She agreed. But she didn't tell many people. Not even extended family, until the plans were nearly finalized. The palace wanted absolute discretion. They didn't want leaks. They didn't want pressure. They wanted her recovery protected until the very last possible moment. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, New York, and Montecito, Hollywood conversations were beginning to stir. Actors, producers, and influencers who once aligned with Meghan started noticing the global excitement building around Catherine's potential return. Not excitement based on glamour, not based on scandal, not based on drama, based on survival, humanity, strength. In Hollywood, a place built on reinvention, survival stories always resonate. And that resonance? It made Meghan uneasy. This isn't about villainizing anyone. People feel threatened for many reasons, especially when controlling their own narrative is part of their public identity. And Meghan's identity had long been tied to her ability to reinvent, reclaim, and project strength. But Catherine's comeback wasn't crafted. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't strategic. It was authentic. And authentic moments, they can overshadow even the most polished brand. Now let's go back to Catherine. A few weeks before the event, she began preparing. Slowly, carefully. Her team arranged private dress fittings so she wouldn't be overwhelmed by crowds or designers. She tried on gowns that were elegant but comfortable, beautiful but manageable. She adjusted her accessories so they wouldn't be heavy. The palace even practiced walking speeds with her to ensure she wouldn't push herself too hard. Her stylist described one moment, off the record, where Catherine sat in front of the mirror, touched her hair, and whispered, "I just want to look like me again." There was pain in that sentence. There was hope in it, too. As the event approached, Catherine grew more resolute, more centered, more determined. Not for the cameras, not for the public, for herself. And then, the night before the performance arrived, Catherine didn't sleep much. She sat by her window, watching the city lights, feeling the weight of everything she'd been through. The medical tests, the uncertainty, the lost months, the emotional toll on her family, the endless speculation, the fear of stepping back into a world that hadn't paused while she healed. She wondered if she would be strong enough, if she would smile convincingly, if she would wobble physically, if her emotions would betray her publicly. She confided in William, "I'm afraid I'll let people down." And William said, "You've already done the impossible, just by healing." So she breathed, and she decided, no matter how difficult it felt, she would step back into the world, not as a symbol, but as a human being reclaiming her life. The next morning, the journey to the event began, and that's when something unexpected happened. Minutes before walking onto the red carpet, Catherine received a message. Not from Meghan, not from Harry, not from the palace. From someone she never expected to hear from that night. Someone whose message would shake her and change the emotional tone of her entire reappearance. But we're not ready to reveal who yet, because what happened next and what that message said would alter everything the public believed about the night Catherine returned. And no one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. What if the most unforgettable part of Catherine's return wasn't the red carpet, the dress, the applause, or the moment flashes exploded like fireworks around her? But what happened before she stepped out of the car? What if the most emotional, most vulnerable, most revealing moment took place in silence? In the back seat, away from cameras, in a space where she allowed herself to feel everything she had been suppressing for months. That's where this chapter begins. But first, let me ask you directly. Have you ever had to face something life-changing while pretending to be calm? Have you ever forced a smile while shaking inside? Have you ever walked into a room knowing everyone would look at you, analyze you, question you, admire you, all at once? Now imagine experiencing all of that after fighting for your life. That was the weight Catherine carried on the night of the Royal Variety Performance 2025. And behind the scenes? There was tension no camera could capture. There was fear no tabloid could summarize. There was determination no headline could accurately portray. But the moment everything shifted, the moment that changed the entire energy of the night, happened just minutes before the world saw her. Let's go back to the car. Catherine sat in the back seat with William beside her. The soft hum of the engine filled the silence. Outside, crowds were already gathering. Reporters whispering through earpieces. Fans clutching flags and flowers. Photographers adjusting their lenses like soldiers preparing for a mission. But inside the car, stillness. Catherine's hands were folded tightly in her lap. William could see it, the tension in her shoulders, the quiet in her breathing, the storm in her eyes. He asked, "Are you all right?" She nodded, but the nod wasn't real. You know that kind of nod. The "I'll be fine" nod, the "don't worry about me" nod, the nod people give when they're holding something together with fragile threads. And then her phone buzzed. She looked down, and the moment she read the message, she froze. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened. Her eyes widened, not in fear, not in confusion, but in something William recognized instantly. Shock. Absolute, unmistakable shock. "Who is it?" William asked gently. She didn't answer at first. She stared at the screen as if she needed to read the message 3, 4, 5 times for it to make sense. Finally, she whispered, "It's unexpected." Now, remember the timing. Remember the tension. Remember the emotional weight of the night. This message did not come from the palace. It did not come from an aide. It did not come from one of her usual circles. It came from someone who, in that moment, should have been the very last person to contact her. But we're not ready to reveal who it was yet. Not until we understand the significance of the moment she was about to walk into. Because the Royal Variety Performance 2025 wasn't just an event. It was a test. A test of her strength. A test of her physical recovery. A test of her emotional resilience. A test of whether she could stand in front of the world after months of vulnerability and sickness. Let's go inside the venue now, before Catherine arrives. The air backstage buzzed with anticipation. Performers were doing last-minute vocal warm-ups. The orchestra rehearsed the opening bars one more time. Producers adjusted earpieces, whispered directions, paced nervously. Everyone knew the significance of Catherine's appearance. No one said it aloud, but they felt it. It wasn't just another royal engagement. It was the return of a woman who had become a symbol of quiet strength. And yet, there was tension beneath that excitement. Because not everyone thought Catherine would come. There had been whispers, rumors, conflicting statements, medical speculation, doubts from journalists, worries from royal watchers, silent uncertainty within the palace. Some insiders feared she would cancel at the last minute. But she didn't, even though she could have, even though no one would have blamed her, even though her doctors insisted she pace herself, even though recovery is unpredictable and fatigue can strike without warning. She came anyway, because she wanted to reclaim something cancer nearly stole from her: her life, her identity, her presence. But the pressure was enormous. Backstage, William's staff had negotiated a strict plan. No long waits. No extended standing. No overwhelming crowds. No invasive flashbulbs. A shorter walk. A slower pace. A designated quiet room if she needed a break. They thought they had accounted for everything. But they didn't account for the emotional shock Catherine felt from that unexpected message. Let's return to the car. Her eyes filled with something that wasn't fear, wasn't sadness, wasn't joy. It was complexity, layered emotion. Something William couldn't interpret immediately. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. Catherine shook her head again, gently this time. "Not yet," she said. "Not yet." What did that mean? Was she processing? Protecting William? Trying not to derail the moment? Trying not to break her composure minutes before stepping into the spotlight? William didn't press her. He took her hand instead. A small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "Whatever happens," he told her, "we do this together." Outside, the crowd began cheering. Inside, Catherine blinked away the emotional weight from the message. She inhaled, held it, exhaled slowly, and then she whispered something under her breath, something the driver overheard but never repeated publicly. "Let me be strong tonight." When the car door opened, Catherine stepped out slowly, and instantly, the world erupted. Applause, cheers, gasps, flashes, tears from strangers who had prayed for her. Signs reading, "We love you, Catherine." Voices shouting her name in chorus. But here's something most people don't know. When she first stepped out, she almost stumbled. Not from weakness, not from nerves, from emotion. Her eyes glistened. Her breath quivered. Her shoulders trembled. The cameras didn't capture that. It happened in the fraction of a second before she steadied herself. William saw, her security saw, her stylist saw, but the public saw only the strength, only the grace, only the comeback. And that's the power of her presence. She doesn't need to speak for people to feel her humanity. But remember, Catherine wasn't the only one with trembling emotions that night. Because the moment she walked onto that carpet, Meghan's name began trending too. Not in celebration, not in support, not in connection to Catherine's return, but because of a leak, a comment, a rumor, a spark that had begun in Montecito hours earlier. People online were already whispering, "Did Meghan really say that? Is this true? Why would she say something like that tonight of all nights?" Chaos began forming on social media in real time, and Catherine had no idea yet. She was focused only on making it through the night. One step at a time, one smile at a time, one breath at a time. Let's go backstage again. While Catherine and William approached the entrance, staff members whispered urgently, "Is she okay? She looks overwhelmed. Should we delay the opening? What if she needs a break?" But Catherine kept walking. She kept smiling. She kept moving. And then she reached the backstage hallway, a quiet space behind the curtains where she paused. This was the moment photographers didn't capture. This was the moment only insiders witnessed. She leaned against the wall for a second, closed her eyes, let her hand glide across her stomach, instinctively, protectively, grounding herself. centering herself. And then her phone buzzed again. Another message. From the same person. Catherine's expression softened this time. Not shock, not tension, but something warmer. Something conflicted. Something she didn't know how to interpret in the middle of such a monumental night. William stepped closer. "Is it them again?" he asked. Catherine nodded. "What did they say?" She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him the phone. William read the message. And his reaction, sharp inhale, tightened jaw, stunned silence, said everything Catherine didn't have the strength to say out loud. "Why tonight?" he whispered. Catherine shook her head. "I don't know." Behind them, a producer peered around the corner. "Your Royal Highnesses, we're ready." Catherine straightened her posture. William gently placed a hand on the small of her back. And together, they walked forward. But the meaning of that message, and the identity of the person who sent it, would change everything about how this night was remembered. And here's the twist. The message wasn't critical. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't jealous. It wasn't competitive. It was emotional, supportive, surprising. What if the most unforgettable moment of the Royal Variety Performance 2025 wasn't what you saw, but what you didn't? What if the glittering cameras, the roaring applause, the perfectly choreographed red carpet were just the surface, hiding a storm of tension, emotions, and secrets swirling beneath? Because the truth is simple. Everyone saw the glamour. No one saw what happened backstage. And that is where Chapter 3 begins. Let me start by asking you something directly. Have you ever walked into a room smiling while your stomach was twisting itself into knots? Have you ever pretended to be composed when your heart was racing? Have you ever forced yourself to be strong because you had no other choice? Then you already understand the exact emotional state Catherine was in the moment she entered the Royal Variety Performance venue. But the audience? They had no idea. For them, it was an event. Another sparkling royal appearance, another dazzling gown, another moment to screenshot and post on social media. They didn't see the months of preparation, the fragile hope in her heart, the fear that she was taking a step too big, too soon. And they certainly didn't see what was happening behind the curtain. Let's open that curtain now. Because while Catherine and William arrived with grace and poise on the outside, tension wrapped around them like invisible thread. It tightened with every step, every flash, every instinctive glance they exchanged. The moment they stepped out of the car, the crowd erupted. It was loud, too loud, louder than expected. For a second, just a second, Catherine's breath hitched. William noticed immediately. His arms subtly shifted, moving closer, not touching, but close enough that she felt the reassurance. He whispered something under his breath, too low for cameras to catch. 2 words. "I'm here." It grounded her. But backstage? Backstage was a different story. Backstage was pressure. The kind that builds in silence. The kind that circulates through whispered briefings. The kind that crackles in the air when everyone is trying to pretend everything is normal, even when they all know it isn't. Catherine hadn't appeared publicly in months. The staff wasn't used to protecting her physically like this. Security wasn't used to shielding someone still recovering. Assistants weren't used to watching her so closely. Even the performers seemed more nervous than usual, as if they understood the weight of her presence. Every hallway felt tense. Every staff member moved with caution. Every step Catherine took felt like walking into history. But here's what no camera captured. The moment Catherine paused behind the curtain just before stepping onto the red carpet. It lasted barely 2 seconds, but it was loaded with meaning. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers trembled slightly. She swallowed hard, fighting a wave of emotion rising in her chest. This wasn't stage fright. This was vulnerability. Pure, raw, human. And then something unexpected happened. A sound backstage that made her stop again. A phone buzzed. Not her phone. Not William's. One of the staff members. But the sound made her turn instinctively. And that's when she saw it. A headline flashing across the screen. Her own name. Her own photo. Her return plastered everywhere already, before she had even stepped out. And right beneath it, in smaller text, Meghan's team responds to Catherine's surprise comeback. Her eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. She said nothing, but her eyes flickered with a spark of emotion. Confusion? Concern? Sadness? Annoyance? William saw her reaction. He didn't need to see the headline to understand what happened. He stepped closer. "You don't need to read any of that," he said quietly. She nodded. But the moment stayed with her. Because while Catherine had been preparing for the evening with vulnerability and hope, Meghan had been reacting, and reacting loudly. But we'll get to that part later. Right now, something else was happening behind the scenes, something even more important. Let's go backstage again, just moments earlier. A makeup artist whispered to another, "I can't believe she's really here." A security officer adjusted his earpiece and muttered, "Everyone needs to stay sharp. Tonight is delicate." A palace aide checked her notes repeatedly, her voice low and urgent. "We keep everything moving. We don't linger. We stay flexible." There were more paramedics than usual, discreet but present. There were more senior staff members than usual. There were more precautions than the public ever realized. And through all of this, Catherine walked quietly, absorbing everything, holding her posture, breathing slowly. A woman balancing strength and fragility at the same time. But then came the message, the one hinted at in Chapter 2. Just minutes before stepping out onto the red carpet, an aide approached her. "Ma'am, someone sent you a message. We weren't sure whether to show you, but His Royal Highness approved." Catherine blinked. "From whom?" The aide hesitated, then handed over the phone. Catherine's eyes widened when she saw the sender. It was someone she hadn't spoken to in months. Someone whose silence had been heavy. Someone who mattered more to her than the public knew. The message read, "I'm proud of you, and I'm watching tonight." She inhaled sharply, not in pain, in emotion. "You're probably wondering who sent it. Harry? No, not yet. That's too easy, too expected. And the truth is much more surprising. Was it a royal family member? One who had drifted away? Possibly, but not the one you think. Was it someone Catherine bonded with privately during her recovery? Someone the public never sees? You'll find out soon, but not yet. Because the significance of the message doesn't make sense until the next part of the story unfolds. For now, all you need to know is this. The message steadied her. She handed the phone back. She exhaled. She squared her shoulders. And she said 8 simple words to William. "I think. I'm ready. Let's do this now." And then the curtain lifted. The lights hit her. The cameras erupted. The applause surged like a tidal wave. But while the world watched the perfect royal image, the gown, the smile, the poise, no one saw what was happening backstage in real time. Because there was someone else in the wings. Someone watching her closely. Someone who didn't expect to feel emotional, but did. A senior staff member who had been with the family for decades later described the moment like this. She wasn't stepping out as a princess. She was stepping out as a survivor. And that's when the entire mood of the venue changed. Performers whispered among themselves. Stagehands stopped what they were doing. Musicians paused, tuning their instruments. For a moment, even the chaotic machinery of a major televised event felt suspended in time. But here comes the twist, the moment that changed everything backstage. As Catherine walked forward, pausing briefly to wave, another staff member rushed toward a producer and whispered something urgent. Something that made his expression shift instantly. "What? When? Are you sure?" he said, eyes widening. Another staffer overheard and whispered to a colleague. The colleague whispered to someone else. And soon, a ripple of hushed conversations began traveling down the backstage corridor like a warning signal. What had happened? Something online. Something trending. Something tied to Meghan. Something that threatened to overshadow the entire event. But Catherine didn't know that yet. She kept walking, smiling softly, her face glowing with a fragile strength the public hadn't seen in a long time. But William? He noticed the backstage whispers. He saw the sudden tension. He caught the way staff exchanged worried glances. And that's when his protective instincts surged. He leaned in closer to Catherine as they paused for photos. Not touching her, but creating a protective radius around her, a silent shield from whatever chaos was unfolding behind them. But the staff's panic grew. The whispering intensified. And one word kept repeating. Trending. 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 On what? X. Instagram. TikTok. All three. And trending with what? A headline? A leak? A clip? A quote? Or something far more damaging? But here's where things get explosive. Someone backstage finally pulled William aside. They whispered something into his ear. He stiffened. His eyes darkened. His jaw clenched just slightly. He said nothing, but his entire posture changed. Something had gone wrong. Something unexpected. Something that would ignite the next stage of this rivalry. And whatever it was tied directly to Meghan. But the question is, What did William hear? What had appeared online? What was trending before Catherine even finished her entrance? And more importantly, why did it threaten to derail the entire night? We're about to answer that. But not yet. Because what came next backstage? No one saw coming. What if one photograph, just one, had the power to rewrite the global narrative in seconds? What if Catherine's entire comeback, her entire journey, her entire emotional arc crystallized in a single image? A moment so powerful it surged across continents before she even reached the entrance doors. Because that is exactly what happened. And that's why Chapter 4 begins with a question only you can answer. Have you ever seen a photo that made you feel something before you even understood why? A photo that carried emotion like electricity? A photo that didn't just show someone, but revealed them? That was Catherine's viral moment. And trust me, the world wasn't ready. Let's rewind. Catherine took her first steps onto the red carpet. Slow, deliberate, steady. Her dress shimmered beneath the lights, her smile soft but real, her posture delicate yet determined. She wasn't projecting power. She wasn't projecting glamour. She was projecting something far rarer in the royal world. Humanity. And humanity, when captured honestly, spreads like wildfire. We need to pause the scene here for a moment, because while Catherine stepped out, a photographer positioned at the perfect angle lifted his camera. He wasn't the most famous photographer. He wasn't part of the royal press pool. He wasn't even someone Catherine knew. He was just, by fate, timing, and pure instinct, standing exactly where he needed to be. He clicked once, then again, then a third time. 3 photos, 3 seconds, and the world changed. Because on the second click, the camera captured something that no royal image in the last decade had captured. The moment Catherine exhaled. Not a pose, not a practiced royal smile, not a stage gesture. A real exhale, a release, a breath that held months of fear, courage, pain, hope, and healing. And that breath, that tiny, vulnerable moment, became the most shared, most reposted, most talked about image of 2025's royal season. But Catherine didn't know that yet. She was still walking, still smiling, still holding her own fragile strength together like glass that could crack but refused to break. Meanwhile, her photo was already exploding online. Let's go inside the digital wave. Within 30 seconds, hashtags appeared. Hashtag Catherine's return. Hashtag Royal Variety 2025. Hashtag Strong Women. Hashtag We Love You Catherine. Hashtag Princess Power. Within 1 minute, major news outlets reposted the photo with breathless captions. Within 2 minutes, celebrities began sharing it. Within 5 minutes, cancer survivors posted emotional messages, thanking her for showing up, for fighting, for being visible through something so deeply difficult. Within 8 minutes, the comments section overflowed with support, tears, pride, relief. Within 12 minutes, the photo hit 1 million likes. Within 15 minutes, the internet crowned it the moment of the night. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. A different digital wave, a different hashtag, a different narrative. Because while Catherine's comeback was going viral, Meghan was trending too. But for the opposite reason. Before we get to that, let's zoom back into the red carpet. Catherine continued moving down the line, waving gently, pausing briefly, placing one foot carefully in front of the other. She leaned slightly toward William whenever she felt unsure, and he responded with barely detectable shifts, the kind that come from years of partnership. They looked like a couple moving through a moment together, not a prince escorting a princess, but a husband helping his wife through a monumental emotional task. But something unusual happened next. As Catherine paused to greet a child in the crowd, her expression softened, completely naturally, completely unposed. The child handed her a small handmade card that read, "Welcome back. You're brave." Catherine blinked, her eyes glistening. Her smile trembled. Her voice cracked when she whispered, "Thank you." A camera caught that too. Click. And just like that, the second viral image was born. But now, let's go backstage again. Because remember the whispers? The frantic glances? The panicked staffers rushing back and forth? They weren't reacting to Catherine's photo. They were reacting to something else. Something from Meghan's side. Because right as Catherine's first viral photo hit the internet, another post appeared online. A post that changed the entire energy in the venue. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't an official statement. It wasn't Meghan herself posting something. It was a leak. A leak of Meghan's alleged backstage comment. She only came back to steal the spotlight from me. Someone put it out there. Someone who wasn't supposed to. Someone who heard something they shouldn't have and decided the world needed to know. But how did it go public so fast? Simple. The source told one person. That person dropped it anonymously on social media. Within seconds, people recognized the phrasing. Within minutes, it went viral. Within 15 minutes, it was trending. And it happened while Catherine was still walking the red carpet. Imagine the contrast. On one side of the world, a woman battling global scrutiny and fighting for relevance, allegedly making a petty comment. On the other side, a woman who battled cancer quietly and returned with humility. The internet didn't hesitate. It drew the line immediately. But Catherine didn't know the storm was building. Not yet. Meanwhile, Meghan's team realized what happened, and they panicked. Phones buzzed in Montecito. PR group chats exploded. Agents sent urgent messages. One team member, according to a later leak, wrote, "This is bad. This is really bad. But again, let's hold that thread for now." Back to Catherine. As she approached the main entrance, the atmosphere reached a crescendo. Applause grew louder. People stood straighter. The energy felt celebratory, emotional, historic, all at once. Then, the moment that broke the internet. Catherine turned to look over her shoulder, just for a second, as the wind lightly lifted her hair. Her expression was serene, composed, glowing. She looked like a woman reclaiming her place in the world, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she earned her strength back. That image, that one, became the most liked royal photo since the coronation. But here's the twist. It also triggered something else entirely. Because as that photo trended, so did Meghan's alleged comment. And the contrast was brutal. One post was filled with inspiration, love, hope, admiration. The other was filled with anger, disbelief, disappointment, and frustration. The online world wasn't subtle. One tweet went viral instantly. Catherine is fighting cancer. Meghan is fighting for attention. And whether fair or not, that's how millions perceived the night. But here's the part no one expected. Someone in the crowd captured a short clip, just a few seconds, of Catherine pausing in a very specific way. A pause that wasn't dramatic, wasn't staged, wasn't obvious. A pause that showed she felt something in that moment. Something internal, emotional, private. It wasn't fear. It wasn't discomfort. It wasn't nervousness. It was something else. A fleeting flicker of sadness. As if she sensed something was off. As if she felt a shift in the atmosphere. As if she knew, intuitively, that something was happening behind the scenes. Was it the message she received earlier? Was it the whispers backstage? Was it a subtle look from William that told her he'd heard something troubling? We don't know. But one thing is certain. Her instinct wasn't wrong. Because the storm was just beginning. And as Catherine walked into the venue, radiant, resilient, unknowingly redefining the royal family's future, the online world erupted into chaos. Headlines broke. Tweets spread. Tension exploded globally. And Meghan? She was about to react. But what came next? No one. Not the palace, not Montecito, not the public, saw coming. What if the most explosive reaction of the night didn't come from the palace, didn't come from the press, didn't come from the public, but came from Meghan Markle herself? What if the moment Catherine's comeback went viral, Meghan's world tilted, not gradually, not subtly, but instantly and violently, setting off a PR meltdown behind Montecito's carefully polished walls? Because that is exactly what happened. And here's the question you need to hold in your mind as we begin Chapter 5. When someone has spent years building a brand based on reinvention, relevance, and narrative control, how do they react when the world suddenly shifts focus to someone else? Especially someone they didn't expect to rise again. At least not this fast, not this strongly, not this powerfully. Especially someone they once competed with. Especially someone the public loves in a completely different way. So let's go to Montecito. It's late afternoon. The sun is dipping, the temperature warm, the house quiet. That curated kind of quiet that only multi-million-dollar estates have. Everything is designed to soothe, to calm, to center. But inside, chaos. Phones buzzing. Group chats exploding. PR strategists typing in frantic bursts. Assistants whispering urgently in hallways. Screens lighting up with trending alerts, rapid-fire news updates, headlines shifting every second. And in the middle of it all, Meghan, not poised, not polished, not camera-ready, caught off guard. She wasn't expecting Catherine to overshadow the entire global conversation. Not today, not this dramatically, not in a single moment. Because remember, Meghan had planned her own announcement cycle. New projects, quiet strategic partnerships, a documentary teaser, a behind-the-scenes feature set to drop later in the week, a meticulously crafted rollout. But Catherine's return obliterated it. In one night, in one photo, in one breath. And that's where the emotional tension spikes. Because Meghan didn't want to be overshadowed again. Not after everything she and Harry went through. Not after leaving the royal system. Not after reinventing themselves. Not after rebuilding their narrative piece by piece. So when her team saw Catherine trending, the urgency kicked in. But when they saw the alleged comment Meghan made trending too, the panic doubled. Let's zoom in on the exact moment Meghan found out. She was sitting in her home office, the warm, minimalist one with the perfectly curated backdrop that's been seen in countless interviews. She was finishing a Zoom call about a philanthropic initiative when her phone buzzed twice, loudly, insistently. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She sighed, glanced at the screen, and froze. A notification. Meghan comment leaked, already trending. Her eyebrows snapped together. She tapped. A screenshot popped open. There it was. She only came back to steal the spotlight from me. Her own words, the ones she never expected to leave that room, now everywhere. And beneath it, thousands of comments. Some shocked, some furious, some mocking, some disappointed, some downright vicious. And then came the hashtags. Hashtag Meghan said WHAT. Hashtag not her best moment. Hashtag insensitive much. Hashtag Catherine deserves better. Hashtag spotlight scandal. And the one Meghan hated the most. Hashtag Team Catherine. That one burned. She stared at the screen, her chest tight, her pulse quickening. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Her assistant rushed in, breathless. Meghan, it's spreading faster than we can track. Meghan swallowed hard. Is there more? Did anything else leak? Not yet, the assistant said. But we don't know who posted it. Or what else they heard. That last sentence hit Meghan harder than the leak itself. Because SHE knew there was more. The second line. The harsher one. The one she regretted instantly after saying it. The one she prayed would never surface. If the first line leaked, why not the second? Her mind raced. Her heartbeat hammered. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just a PR issue. This was a credibility threat. A brand threat. A moral threat. Because Catherine wasn't controversial tonight. She wasn't political. She wasn't divisive. She was inspirational. And you never want to be the villain in a moment like that. Meghan stood up abruptly and paced the room. This isn't fair, she said, voice sharp. I didn't mean it like that. I wasn't serious. This is out of context. Completely out of context. Her PR director, who had just arrived, spoke carefully. Context won't matter right now. The internet is emotional. They're reacting to the contrast between Catherine's comeback and that quote. You need to stay calm so we can strategize. But Meghan wasn't calm. She was unraveling. Not in a dramatic, screaming way. In a quiet, internal collapse, the worst kind. The kind where your thoughts spiral faster than you're breathing. She sat back down and whispered, "Why now of all nights?" Her PR director didn't answer. Because there was no good answer. Now let's contrast this with what was happening in London at the exact same time. While Meghan's team panicked, strategized, typed furiously. Catherine was posing for photos, smiling at fans, connecting with performers, radiating a fragile strength that made the world fall in love with her all over again. Two worlds, two emotions, two narratives, colliding in real time. But here's something the public doesn't know. Meghan's team did consider sending out a statement. Immediately. A calm, polished, controlled message claiming the comment was fabricated. But they didn't. Why? Because Meghan stopped them. I don't want to lie, she said quietly. And that, ironically, was the moment that saved her from an even bigger backlash. Her PR director blinked. Are you saying you did say it? Meghan hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. So they dropped the idea of a denial. Because a shaky denial is worse than silence. But Meghan didn't stay silent for long. Something in her snapped. The fear, the jealousy, the frustration, the sense of being overshadowed again. It all fused into a single decision. I need to respond somehow, she said, voice tight. Her team froze. Respond? Now, during Catherine's comeback? That would be seen as spiteful, desperate, insensitive, or even worse, vindictive. But Meghan wasn't thinking strategically now. She was thinking emotionally. Because the internet wasn't just criticizing her. It was mocking her, dragging her, comparing her to Catherine in ways she couldn't defend against. Her assistant read a comment aloud without thinking. Catherine attempts to heal from cancer with grace. Meghan attempts to heal her ego with pettiness. Meghan flinched as if slapped. Then something unexpected happened. She stood up straighter. Her expression hardened. Her voice steadied. Find out who leaked it, she said. Call everyone who was in that room. Her assistant nodded quickly and left. Her PR director opened a folder. We need to strategize for the next 12 hours. The internet moves fast. If the second line leaks, Meghan cut him off. It won't, she insisted. It can't. But she didn't finish the sentence. Because she wasn't convinced. And neither was her team. Meanwhile, back in London, the backstage tension grew. What William heard earlier wasn't the comment. It was the reaction to the comment. A reaction that was about to reach Catherine. But here's the twist. The person who sent Catherine that emotional message earlier? The person who told her I'm proud of you? The person she never expected to hear from? That person was about to call her. Directly. And that phone call would change the direction of the entire night.